Turning points in history.
Noah's Ark, real boat or child's plaything? The controversy has raged through the years. Shrouded in mocking doubt and unbridled ridicule, the famed story is further diluted by the Church's own ignorance of the facts and refusal to tell the real story. Church after church is succumbing to faulty secular science and leaving their biblical foundation to crumble into a meaningless heap. What can we do to stop this flood of apathy sweeping over the nation? What can we do indeed?
We remember it as a Bible story from Sunday school, the cute little ark in the shape of a bathtub, the giraffe's head sticking through the roof. But as we look into God's Word, the Bible, the facts reveal a much different picture. The epic journey of Noah and his family was not just a bedtime story, but a real event involving a real boat. Hi, I'm Mark Loy. Join me, along with Ken Ham, Dr. John Whitcomb, and Tim Lovett, as we explore a fascinating account of faith and courage. Noah's Ark, thinking outside the box.
The key problem that people have with a global flood is the ark.
One of my pet peeves is opening up children's books and looking at a picture of Noah's Ark looking like an overloaded bathtub with giraffes sticking out the chimney about to sink at any moment.
Genesis 6:15 says it black and white, 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. As soon as you see those dimensions, 300 by 50 by 30, you should be realizing that that story is very authentic.
Written in 1961, the book, The Genesis Flood, was a monumental turning point in how Christians viewed the story of Noah, the Ark, and the flood. Henry Morris and John Whitcomb co-authored this work and established a scientifically viable explanation for the worldwide flood and the ark that survived that global catastrophe. Although Dr. Morris went to be with his Creator and Lord in 2006, Dr. John Whitcomb continues to lecture and teach on this intriguing subject. He joins us to reminisce about Henry and their historical book.
In the fall of 1953, a great hydrodynamic engineer, a creation scientist named Henry M. Morris came to our campus at Winona Lake, Indiana, gave a fantastic lecture on the Genesis flood. That really caught my attention. You mean the flood of Noah's day could have covered the whole world, have been the instrument under God of transforming trillions of creatures into fossilized forms of plants and animals, marine creatures. And we then decided to co-author our book, The Genesis Flood, which was published in 1961. We became deeply amazed and respectful of the Genesis record of the flood and Noah's Ark.
Pulled from a dusty shelf in a small Christian bookstore, the Genesis Flood held a particular interest for a young science teacher in Australia. Ken Ham, the founder of Answers in Genesis, owes a debt of gratitude to Whitcomb and Morris for their groundbreaking work. Along with the godly influence of Ken's father Mervyn and God's infallible word, Ken was deeply impacted by the ideas of Whitcomb and Morris. In fact, they helped plant the seeds that would blossom into a worldwide creation ministry.
There's no doubt the Genesis Flood is a historic book in this world. It's a book that goes down in the history of Christendom as the book that really started the modern creationist movement that is now spread around the world. And I believe the modern creationist movement, the modern biblical creationist movement, is really a ministry for this era of history.
Whitcomb and Morris showed the world that the biblical ark was large enough to hold all the land-dwelling, air-breathing animals. They also established that the biblical dimensions of the ark gave it the needed proportions to be a truly seaworthy craft. While the initial box shape was certainly a step in the right direction, Dr. Whitcomb admits that the box design could be improved upon.
Henry Morris did the engineering part of our book, and he simply took the dimensions given, of course, 300 cubits long, maybe 450 feet approximately, the width, 50 cubits, the height, 30 cubits, and just assume from those three dimensions given that you have a rectangular shape. Now, the refinements of that, of course, God didn't record in the text, and so that is left to our evaluation analysis as we think through the issues today.
We need to distinguish between holding on to items that the Bible clearly references, clearly talks about, statements the Bible clearly makes, which we adhere to and we don't change, but being prepared to be flexible in regard to man's models that are built upon the Bible.
The ark in the shape of a box also gained popularity in 1976 when a documentary, In Search of Noah's Ark, was released. This film also presented the shape of the ark as box-like, but that conclusion came from unsubstantiated eyewitness accounts and a few blurred photographs of a structure on Mount Ararat. It's important to understand that there's no solid evidence to support the claim that Noah's Ark has been found, and that it was indeed box-shaped.
I personally don't believe we've ever really found it. That doesn't bother me, friend, because Jesus said, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." You don't have to find a piece of the ark to believe that it was there. Somewhere buried deep in those mountains. And if and when someday God shows it to us, we'll say, "Lord, we're amazed because the design of that gigantic thing that you put people into and air-breathing animals into is exactly what was needed for the catastrophism through which it passed, to deliver alive our human ancestors from whom all of us have since descended."
Noah and his wife, along with Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives, departed the ark and entered a whole new world. Imagine the exciting stories they passed down to their children and the generations that followed. Distorted by repeated storytelling, these accounts, found around the world, have fallen into the category of ancient myths and legends. Although they're only shadows of the actual event, the bits of truth they do contain coincide dramatically with the real story.
I remember one of the first times I went to the Brisbane Museum in the city of Brisbane in Australia, and I saw this interesting series of books about Aboriginal myths and legends concerning the Australian Aborigines, their Dreamtime legends that were handed down. And so I bought the books and I started to read them. And as I read them, I was amazed because I thought I was reading Genesis 1 to 11. I mean, it was a little different, but there was a story there about a global flood and a man who built a boat and 3 sons on the boat and so on, a rainbow at the end of the flood. And the reason that you see so many different legends and different cultures around the world, and even going back to the Babylonians, that sound just like Genesis 1 to 11, is because they have a basis in truth.
The story of Noah's Ark, written before Genesis was written by the Babylonians in the Gilgamesh epic, which has been discovered in cuneiform tablets, tells us that the ark was built in 7 days by Utnapishtim and was a cube 180 cubits on each side.
There's a contradiction when you claim that the Bible got its story, the source of the story for Noah's Ark comes from these other legends, because these other legends have got lots of mistakes in them. They say silly things like they're making a ship which is a cube, and other mistakes which are quite obvious. The proportions in the Bible are very realistic, so realistic that those proportions happen to match a modern cargo ship. And we wouldn't expect that. If that was a made-up story, we wouldn't expect them to accidentally come across 300 by 50 by 30 cubits as the proportions of this imaginary vessel. For example, when they make cargo ships, 50 by 30 would be just the typical proportion you'd see in the cross-section of a cargo ship. It gives you about the right stability, not too much, not too little. In fact, those proportions are so good that one of the naval architects that I've been working with, he actually realized that Genesis was literal because of those proportions in Genesis 6:15.
The Bible is quite specific on the ark's dimensions, but it doesn't go into detail regarding its shape. The only possible allusion to the ark's shape in the Bible would be the Hebrew word teva. Some have claimed that the definition of this word is box, but that's not necessarily true.
The word for ark in the Bible is teva, which nobody knows what it means. Teva only appears twice in the Bible. It appears for Noah's teva, and also there's the teva for Moses' baby basket.
In Hebrew vocabulary, as in any language, the meaning of a word is more and more precisely understood the more often it's used in different contexts. But when it's only mentioned a couple of times like that, we have a God anointed and approved imagination to fill in the details that are not given by the understanding of the exact word itself.
Well, it doesn't necessarily mean box, because Moses' baby basket was just a little basket.
Tim Levitt, a mechanical engineer and supervisor of the Ark exhibit at the Creation Museum near Cincinnati, began his quest to come up with a possible description of an ark design that would complement Noah's shipbuilding abilities.
What was the technology like at that time before the flood? Well, there are a couple of clues in the Bible. First of all, the long lifespans. If a person lives for centuries, they're going to be very competent. They're going to be great at a lot of different things. Also, they're very healthy. To live that long, it implies that you would be a very healthy person, good concentration, healthy body, etc. So you're very capable and able to output a lot of work.
The Bible makes it absolutely clear that the first people on this earth were the most brilliant people. Technology, of course, had not increased to the extent it has today, but the intrinsic brilliance of man is such that even Tubal-Cain, long before the flood, was an inventor of every cutting instrument of brass and iron.
We would expect that the technology was probably a similar level to ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, China, for example, and perhaps similar to the pre-industrial revolution in Europe.
Noah, with the available technology and tools and help available to him to build this, over the 120 years that God gave him, was perfectly capable of building such a gigantic body.
Working with two naval architects on the other side of the world, Tim quickly discovered that the familiar box shape would not fare so well at sea. The flat sides and bottom would give the passengers a very rough and even dangerous ride. Tim built several 6-foot models for some open water testing. One of his models was built to the specifications of a PhD naval architect. The model turned and aligned with the wind, in contrast to the box-like boat that rocked sideways on the waves. He took this discovery and applied it to his proposed model of the ark. Was this a logical model based on information given in the book of Genesis?
The first question is, what were the conditions like for Noah's Ark? Was it dead calm, or were there waves, wind, etc.? Well, there's a number of clues in the Bible. The first clue is that Noah had to build something that looked like a ship. It wasn't just any old shape, it looks very ship-like. That 300 by 50 by 30, that's a big clue. That looks like a ship. So we're expecting the water to act pretty normal. It's like the ocean because we're building something that looks like a ship. There's other clues as well. For example, in Genesis 8:1, God sent a wind, and wind creates waves. The Bible doesn't specify a wind-catching feature on the ark, but it does tell you a relatively long hull, and that is not exactly what you would expect. If you were just designing a vessel to float on the water, you wouldn't make it so long. It takes more work to build it long, it takes more wood, and it's more of a danger as it crosses over waves that it could break. What makes the most sense is that the vessel was built for comfort as well as strength and capacity and seakeeping. So you have to balance all these factors together. In order to make it comfortable, you want that ark to be running through the waves, not side onto the waves, which it would fall into naturally. There's a number of ways to do that. All you need is any sort of wind obstruction on one end. Could be a sail, could be a building, could be a wooden fin. But I wanted something which was low maintenance. I didn't want sails that they had to look after. So if we just build a wooden fin to catch the wind on one end, and at the other end I wanted something that would catch in the water. And the usual way to do that is to have a thing called a skeg, which acts like a rudder at the back of a ship.
Once Tim had completed his ark model, he noticed a remarkable resemblance to ancient ship designs.
What I ended up with was something that looked familiar. It looked a little bit like the designs of ancient ships, such as the Greek triremes and more ancient ships. What I noticed on the ancient designs is they had high stems. And a lot of the very ancient ones had high stems on one end and an extended mysterious appendage on the other.
Were the features in these ships leftover technology from Noah's Ark itself? We can't say for sure, but it's possible that the storm weathering design that Tim developed for his ark is seen on some of the earliest ships.
Historians who've been studying ships have found these appendages at the back of ships. Now, some people have thought that they were prototypes of the Greek ramming bow, but this is at the back, not the front. This stern appendage is called a mystery if you don't know what it's for. But if you view it as part of a storm-keeping package in conjunction with a high stem at the other end, then it makes perfect sense. So maybe these ancient shipbuilders knew exactly what they were doing. Or maybe they were just copying features from Noah's Ark, which they'd seen their fathers and grandfathers do.
What about the construction of the ark itself? How could such a large wooden boat hold together, especially in rough seas? A recent documentary produced by the BBC scoffs at the idea of